Hello, good afternoon. We are live officially after a couple of technical glitches here. So give it a second before we start chit-chatting. But Jim Willie, is a privilege and an honor to have you join me on Rethinking the Dollar RTD Live Talk. Looking forward to having a nice conversation today, getting your thoughts on where we're at in the economy as well as your predictions on the future. So I hope we got 4 people watching. So for those that are watching, I want to make sure audio-wise everything is good. So can you chime in and let me know if you hear me all right? And then Jim Willie, if you don't mind, just saying hello to everybody. Let them know you're here as well so they can make sure our audio is good.
Pleasure to be on here, Mike. And I'm talking from Costa Rica, where it's nice and sunny. You guys are freezing your butts off up there.
Freezing our butts off is very true. It is abnormally cold. You walk outside and you breathe, and it hurts. It's very uncomfortable. So that's good. So, all right, here we got Henry, Lyndon B, JT, Matt. So good. I'm glad to have you guys join us. Looking forward to some good conversation. And as always, you see the number right above my shoulder. I want you guys to call in and ask a question if need be, and get your answers from Mr. Jim Willie. So we'll begin now. Jim Willie, the editor at goldenjackass.com, is joining us to share his thoughts on the globe as well as the dollar. I've watched you for several years now, and I found your commentary to be very unique in the fact that I'll say it. Did you call it is it the shiest dollar or the shit dollar? Or you gave it a couple terms that I think people need to hear about. So, Jim, welcome to RTD Live Talk.
Okay, I like to keep it clean, Mike. I don't call it a shit dollar. I call it a shiest dollar.
Shiest dollar. Okay, so I'm wrong.
Because shiest is German for shit.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So
it sounds a lot more official and I don't know what, sophisticated to talk about the new shiest dollar. And I call it that because, well, first of all, it's going to be a requirement when the dollar loses its global reserve currency status from abuse, deficits, fraud, and military actions to defend it. But it's going to be a shiest dollar because it's got wretched fundamentals that resemble a third world currency. We got annual trade deficit that's now going to be greater than $550 billion for the coming year, because we're tracking worse than last year, which was 550. We're also tracking worse than last year, which was, I think, $1.2 trillion in federal deficit. These are wretched third world fundamentals. So when we lose our global reserve currency status, and that's going to be a gradual process, we'll lose it in parts of the globe, parts of the world, and we will retain it, like with Western Europe and Canada and parts of South America. But when we lose it, we'll be forced to come up with our own dollar. Otherwise, countries won't accept the dollar in trade payment. And what are we going to pay for all the imports with? That's going to be the big question, Mike. What is the United States going to pay? What are they going to use to pay all the imports?
Right. Good point. Now, let me ask you a question real quick before we actually dive into the greater details of how this thing unravels. You know, as of the last couple of months, give or take a year, the dollar has been weakening on the foreign exchange market. So what would you kind of lead to that being? Is that the trigger, or people are dumping the dollar in that regards there? Or what are your thoughts about how it's weakening as far as, you know, on the markets trading wise?
Well, it's very, very weird. It's like a mixed cauldron. You're referring to the dollar dropping value with respect to the dollar index. The dollar index is something like 58% euro in the weight. So when you say the dollar is dropping, you're really saying the euro is rising. And I don't give a crap about any of the paper currencies. I think they're all toilet paper, and they have various amounts of shit stains on them. Okay, so there's a lot of mixture going on. Right now, there's a shortage of dollars worldwide. The dollar swap cost is going up. And by that, I mean, countries that have banking systems and debt is going into default, they need dollars to close them out. The dollar had been rising, not from so much strength, but from weakness everywhere as contracts were going into default. And they needed dollars to close them out. That's not dollar demand from economic growth. That's dollar demand from financial collapse in localized areas.
All right, Jim, 1 second. I don't mean to cut you off, but as I mentioned, we have a caller. So, caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Yeah, hey, this is Jay Scott from North Carolina.
Hold on 1 second. Jim, can you hear that?
Yes, I can.
All right, go ahead. What's your question?
Gotcha. Real quick. So everything we're talking about here, everything we believe, where should we be stationed at globally for the living situation? Should we be in a pocket of city, in an inner city in North America? Should we be South America, Europe? I mean, where should we be living?
Jim, what's your thoughts on that?
It's a tough question.
Thanks for the call, caller.
It's kind of like what country is the safest? My usual answer is there is no safe country. It's a matter of minimizing the risk and finding the least bad place. The least bad place in the United States is away from the poor areas because they're going to have trouble finding food.
Mm-hmm.
The food supplies are going to be short. The ATM machines are not going to be supplying too many dollars. And people might resort to roving bands in the street. So if you're in the suburban areas, that might be safer. If you're in rural areas, that might be the safest. If you can escape to some mountain cabin and have some independent food supply, you're the best of all. But I mean, as for the question of inside the U.S. or outside the U.S., I made my vote in 2007. I left. But my situation was different because I got death threats.
Right.
Death threats from Homeland Security and death threats from Swiss bankers.
Okay, Jim, we have another. Sorry to cut you off a mid-thought, but we have another call. 1 second. Actually, they hung up, so I'm sorry. And so I've had several guests in the past that have kind of chimed in the idea that, if you have the means to, it might be worth your while to explore opportunities outside the country for the sake of cheaper cost of living, as well as just overall better quality of life. So I can kind of understand your point there, but a lot of people don't have the means to do so. So it's kind of a touchy situation, a touchy question.
It's very, very touchy, very sensitive, and very difficult for a lot of people. I have some aware clients who've been with the newsletter for a few years, and they say, I don't want to leave and I cannot leave. I've got family here. I've got, my kids are married and they're having little children now, and I don't want to head off to Panama when my kids are in California.
Right.
And that's very real. But I will say this. In Latin America and in Central America here, there are very few, if not any. In most places, there are no chemtrails.
Right.
Now, for those who aren't familiar, chemtrails are the elite's attempt to add aluminum particulates to the air, increase Alzheimer's and Parkinson, increase benzene level to the air, increase black coal ash to the air, to poison the environment, reduce the sunlight, and basically to kill you slowly.
Right. So, Jim,
we don't have any of that in Costa Rica.
Another question. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Hello.
Hello, how you doing? What's your name? Where you calling from?
I'm good. How are you, Mike?
Excellent. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Blaylock out of Oakland, California.
Hey, Tony, how you doing? What's your question for Jim?
Oh, not too bad. And hello, Jim, Willie. The question I have is the fact that the road that the U.S. is traveling on, either way we go is equal to hyperinflation. Is that not correct, Mr. Willie?
Well, what do you mean by either road we go?
Well, either with the Fed hike or with the Trump hike, with the Trump. What do they call it? Trump trade or Trump economics or
Trumponomics. Weaken the dollar and increase the debt, and then eventually position us for a default.
Right,
Okay,
infrastructure rebuild or anything like that. It's just going to take a lot of money, and they have to print that.
Okay, I do agree that almost every alternative we have that's been on the table will result in severe fractures of the U.S. economy, severe shortages in the U.S. economy, severe price inflation in the economy, and severe disorder in the economy. There's only one solution that I see as viable, and I don't see any initiative or motivation to pursue it at all. That is to bring back foreign money and force it into creating new businesses that export. So we would bring in new business, bring in funds, create new business, hire people, even if it's foreign money. Hire people, create business, and have some kind of a tax credit for exporting a third or more of the output from something like 20 to 40,000 new businesses a year. We need to eradicate the trade deficit. That's what's needed. Now, Trump has a good idea of bringing in foreign held money owned by U.S. citizens and U.S. businesses. But if you look back to the 2006 example where we last did this, it's called repatriating cash. The last time we did this, it was a wretched failure because they permitted the companies to bring back the money and to put it into stock buybacks, to put it into dividend payouts, and to put it into executive compensation enhancements. In other words, zero new business expansion. What Trump has to do is bring in the U.S. money, bring in foreign money, create new businesses, give incentives to create export trade, and do it. Quit talking about it. Do it.
Yeah. Now, say, for example, if all that money comes in, do you think it's going to go to good use as far as helping our economy and helping the Main Street economy, or will it go right to the stock market to continue to pump it up to all-time highs even more so? And will the 1% benefit more so off that money that returns?
Well, as it is now, the 1%, the elite, are in control of the government and policy. Goldman Sachs has control of the Department of Treasury. So they're not making any obstacles for doing exactly what you described as the wrong path. They're not making any obstacle. You got to look at 2006 for the past example. We've been there before. We've done this before, and we did it wrong. And we have no new measures to prevent doing it wrong again. We need to say this cannot go into stock buybacks. We need to say, if you want the money to come back to your company, it has to be into a special designated fund for investment in business expansion. And if you don't use it for business expansion, it is stuck there on your balance sheet and cannot be used. We have no feature for that at all, Mike. None at all. We've been there, we've done it, and we did it wrong.
All right, now, so I have a question from someone watching us via the chat, and it says, "How will the Federal Reserve notes held outside the U.S. What will happen with those notes outside the U.S. when things crash? How will it impact the other economies that are holding all those, notes, fiat notes?"
Okay, well, there's a key word put in there of crash, and I don't expect a crash. Let me change the question. What's going to happen to foreign held dollars outside the U.S. in bank accounts like in Panama, Singapore, Hong Kong, Switzerland, and London? They will retain their value. They will no longer be under the aegis and control for rules and regulations by the U.S. government. They probably will become under the rules and regulations of the International Monetary Fund, which I believe China will take control of. In other words, I expect China to create the rules and regulations after the dollar has its crisis. the Chinese will maintain control of foreign dollars. Now, I don't mean ownership. I mean, they're going to make the rules and regs. Okay. And at that time, when the crisis occurs, that's when the United States government is going to be at a crisis point, forced into a decision to make a new domestic dollar. So let's alter the question again.
Okay.
What happens to the internal dollars? What happens to dollars that Americans hold? They're going to be forced to transfer them, exchange them into the new Scheist dollar. And I think that's where the haircut comes.
Now, hold that thought, Jim. Now,
yeah.
we're gonna have to turn those in for a new note. Now, with the recent, rise of cryptocurrency and the fact that the Fed is looking into having their own digital blockchain-based cryptocurrency, can you see it actually now being in more digital form, even more so than it is now, or could it be paper issuance as well on top of that, just to give people confidence because they are not used to not having the option of going to the bank to withdraw something physical in their hands?
This is a very fuzzy area, Mike, and I don't have a firm answer, but I do believe that the U.S. government and the elite have some kind of a plan for an official crypto element or feature to the new currency that comes. Now, by that, I do not mean that they're going to have a viable, honest method of using cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to come up with a corrupt method, because the basis of cryptocurrency is on two different planks for their construction: transparency and decentralized. Wall Street doesn't like transparency, never has. Wall Street does not like decentralized and never has. So when they come up with an official crypto element or feature to the new currency, it'll probably be deeply flawed and deeply corrupted. People through some type of criminalization or extreme obstacles in their current usage of cryptos. For instance, if you want to use crypto, you got to submit something with your tax form in April, or even quarterly, even more nuisance, to show all your movements, especially movements over, say, $1,000. Furthermore, all capital gains must be taxed. And if they have requirements for reporting and requirements for taxing on gains, a lot of people are going to exit them.
Now you're referring to this government issued, or you talk about what's available right now as far as altcoins and things like that of taxation.
The current long list, led by Ethereum and Bitcoin and a few others, they're, I think, going to be threatened by new rules and regulations regarding reporting of movement and taxing of capital gains. And that will force people to say, oh, well, I'm going to get rid of mine. I'm going to go into the official one. Let's just call it Fed coin. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what its features are, but I guarantee you it'll be centralized and not very transparent. And therefore, it will not be popular, but they're going to try to make it legislated. So I think they're going to try to do damage to the existing cryptos and force people to adopt the new official crypto, like, say, Fed coin.
Now, whenever there's implementation or regulation added into the whole scheme of things, then that's how black markets and underground economies form. Now, do you think that will actually boost the alternative coins up even more once it becomes a true threat to where there's some form of regulation implemented to where it might take off even more? But yet, because it's in the hands of people directly, what's the chance of the government, actually being able to reinforce all that in your opinion?
Well, that's the big question, Mike. Will they be able to enforce their own rules, or will they create a black market that doesn't just flourish out of desire? It's going to flourish out of the absent capacity for the government to control it. And that's where we are right now. They're going to try to use some fear tactics. That's what I expect. They're not going to be able to be effective. So they're going to try to say to people, well, you continue in that direction and you're going to have 100% confiscation. And people are going to say, well, I don't want that. I'm going to go with the Fed coin. And others will say, well, F you. You guys can't touch me anyway. You can't even find me. And others will say, I don't live in your United States, so I don't give a shit what you say anyway. Then other countries, there's a phenomenon, Mike, very prominent right now. Bitcoin is being favored by the West, whereas Ethereum is being favored by the East. Notice that the Russians and the Chinese have not exactly been friendly with respect to Bitcoin.
Right.
Okay, well, there's something going on there. I think the Chinese might build an official RMB type coin linked to their currency, and it might be atop Ethereum. And the United States will probably say, we outlaw Ethereum. And the Chinese will say, we don't really favor Bitcoin and we don't honor it in a lot of places. And the United States is going to say, we love Bitcoin. We think it should be merged in with Fedcoin. So there's going to be an East-West division, a Bitcoin versus Ethereum division. I recommend people to maintain both a Bitcoin and an Ethereum account and move your gains from Bitcoin into Ethereum, because it's probably going to be safer. But, that's just my opinion. That's just my own belief on what's coming. But the black market, as you say, is going to be very real. Right now, crypto is entirely black market. It's out of control with respect, I don't mean with respect to price, I mean out of control with respect to the our government handlers, the Wall Street criminals. They're criminals. Let's just call them what they are. They're criminals. They stole the TARP fund of $700 billion and no consequence. They moved it into preferred stock for the big banks and didn't make it available for lending capital, which is what the Congress set for. And why didn't the Congress declare that Wall Street committed bond fraud and shut down for 30 days the Wall Street banks after the TARP fund incident? Okay, that's how criminalized our controllers are for the government. All right, let's move on if you have another question.
Yes, I do. Actually, question here. It says, do you expect banks in the U.S. to accept or buy bullion at some point after a reset, perhaps?
What do you mean by accept? You mean as deposits?
As deposits, or whether I assume some type of commercial bank having access to or utilizing or acknowledging precious metals in their system.
Oh, I think they will be forced to do so. I think that should be made into a two-part question. First of all, would it be possible to deposit gold, coins or bars at a bank and make a CD out of it? That's one question. I think the answer is yes. I see that as coming, maybe not with all the banks, but with some banks enough to make a critical mass and force some policy changes from the corrupt Wall Street group. Now, Wall Street is just extraordinarily corrupt. They're not going to do the right thing. They're going to do the corrupt thing for their own benefit on their crime syndicate. Okay, the other question is, would it be possible in the future at some or most banks in the U.S. to buy gold coins? And I think, yes, I think that will come about because banks will see it as a profitable line of business. And they might just start with selling United States mint coins, the Eagles for the silver and gold coins, the standard mint variety, not the Canadian, but the Canadian banks might do the Canadian mint coins, the maples, maple leaves. Okay, so I do see that is a very strong possibility. Now imagine how much the banks would benefit if they said, we're going to give interest on your gold CD and make it available capital for our bank to lend out, like for car loans, home improvement loans, mortgages, you name it. But give them some kind of an option where the gold gain remains in the hands of the investor. That's going to be the big issue. If there's a CD based on a gold deposit, who gets the gain? I mean, if gold moves from 1,300 to 1,700 in the course of a 1-year CD, who gets that gain? I think it's the owner of the gold certificate gets the gold redemption and whatever it costs. So the bank's going to have to manage their own gold risk, just like they manage interest rate risk. It's not different. That's not a revolutionary new development.
All right. Now,
when banks issue mortgages, they have to hedge on the interest rate, Mike.
Right, but watch this. Before we even get to that as something that's being that's actually a viable option or alternative down the line, if gold and silver or precious metal was even mentioned in the mainstream news as an option or option for people to hold, then that means that they would have to then confront the idea of whether or not the gold holdings in the reserves at Fort Knox and as well as the Fed Bank in New York is actually there or not. So, I think the idea of precious metals in the people's hand will be hush hush for now. But if it was to come out, how do you think that'll play out as far as that whole auditing the gold that we're supposed to have there, and is it there or where it happened to it? And then they will have a lot of questions to answer if it's not there, as they, or as we're led to believe.
I think that is going to become a major question and a major point of debate and a major issue for policy regarding audit when the U.S. is forced to make its new domestic dollar. I call it the Scheisse dollar, German for shit. It's actually German for a little more than shit, like rubbish, stuff like that. Okay. Anyway, although I had someone tell me recently that Scheisse is basically pure shit in the toilet. It's not rubbish on the lawn. All right, well, fine. So when the U.S. has its question of producing a new domestic-only dollar, there will be enormous debate in the Congress and elsewhere, institutes, think tanks, you name it, governors of the states, Texas in particular, saying, what do we have for gold to produce in backing our new dollar? And then you get to the really ugly, gnarly, nasty questions, because let me just give you some fundamental math, Mike. Mm-hmm. This is shocking stuff. You might have heard this from me elsewhere in an interview. But if you just focus on a $1,250 to $1,300 gold price, and you focus on a $550 billion annual trade deficit, if you back the dollar with gold, and we continue with our current U.S. economy that has inadequate industrial base, the $550 billion trade deficit could result in demands by foreign creditors who own that deficit in trade. We owe them money for the goods imported. That would be equivalent to 13,000 tons of gold a year. So this is a very big motivation for the United States not to create a gold-backed currency. Now, the pressure would be on if Russia and China and Iran and elsewhere come up with a gold-backed currency to serve the Eurasian trade zone, and then the United States is forced to come up with a currency and they do not make a gold backing. I guarantee you one thing will happen. That new dollar, not gold-backed, will go down 90% in 2 years, just like Venezuela. And if you think that there's a crisis in the United States now, you ain't seen nothing, because prices will go up 5 to 10-fold everywhere with shortages, just like Venezuela. I've been calling Venezuela the U.S. example showcase for the last 2 years. Shortage of toilet paper, shortage of staples like rice and beans, shortage of condoms. Now, why would they have a shortage of rice and beans in Venezuela? I'll tell you exactly why. Because it gets exported to cover the trade deficit. So all the things the United States produces in ample supply, if they have a currency crisis, they're going to be exporting it. I'm talking about food.
Yeah. Now,
agriculture.
Now, recent developments in Venezuela. What's your thoughts on the whole petrocoin? The fact that they've allocated some of their oil as well as diamonds and gold, and how they're trying to raise funds. Do you think it's going to work just to be able to pay their current debt, their current obligations? Will that work at all?
Nothing's going to work in Venezuela. Nothing that they try will work. It's so simple. Okay, suppose they've got plan A, B, and C. They're all on the table. I ask a basic question. Who's going to manage it? The Venezuelan government? The same clowns? The same criminals?
Right.
The same guys who gutted their national state oil company?
Yeah.
No, there'll be no trust at all. So what's important about Venezuela is who's going to run it. And right now, something very interesting is happening, Mike. The Venezuelans are losing control of their state oil company because Russian Rosneft has got their mitts in there, and the Chinese are waiting in the wings as creditor. They can get it all when it falls apart even more. The Russians are not stupid. They're not coming in and saying, well, we're going to give you some capital and in return we get credits on oil production. No, the Russians are going to say, we want to have a little more control of this so you effing thieves don't steal it all.
Yeah. Question.
Okay, so when the Venezuelans have their crypto coin, let me put it in simple terms. I don't give a shit. Because the same ridiculous criminal, they're not communists. They're crony fascists. They're dictators. They're likely to steal it. I'd like to have an audit of all the Maduro government officials' foreign accounts.
Yeah, you're going to find something there that will be quite shocking, I'm sure. Jim, we have a caller. Caller, what's your name and where you calling from?
Ryan, I'm calling from North Virginia.
Ryan from North Virginia. How you doing, buddy? What's your question for Mr. Willie?
Have you heard of Ripple, and what do you think about it? You think they're trying to be an American company, trying to be involved in the downfall of it's completely centralized. They can transactions. And do you think it's either CIA or do you think it's just and that when it becomes a threat, they're going to turn it off? Or do you think it's a viable thing?
Jim, did you hear that?
No, you're going to have to repeat that, Mike. I couldn't hear much.
Question was, what do you think about Ripple? Do you think it is a banker's coin, and do you think it's created by, I believe you said, the CIA, and what else did you say, Ryan?
Or do you think it's just created by idiots?
Is it created by idiots? Ripple. And because it's centralized, is it the banker's coin, and is it being pumped intentionally to take some attention off of the altcoins and rising Bitcoin prices?
I'm afraid I'm not really clear on what Ripple is. I thought it was a competitor to PayPal. I thought it was a payment system.
Well, I'm not too familiar with it other than just seeing it on the market cap, knowing that it's been around for quite a while, but it's a centralized coin token that is being used by the banking system. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's, basically second biggest coin, and it's surprising a lot of people.
Well, if that's the case, it's being sponsored by the banking industry, then my guess is that its main investors are Wall Street banks, and therefore I don't trust it.
Fair enough. Warren, you have another question for him?
That was it. Thank you.
All right, thanks for calling. Fair enough. So watch this, Willie. Let's move. Let's move a little bit further out east and what's happening out there. And so we have all the recent transactions with the gold futures, gold-backed yuan futures, and all the things, AIB to BRICS, and all that infrastructure stuff. That's as I mentioned here, sometimes it's just waiting to be switched on. And when it comes online fully, with the probably the new pricing discovery of precious metals and whatnot, let's talk a little bit about that. Where do you see that going, and will it happen this year, next year, or how will all that really impact what's happening over here on this side of the planet?
Okay, a year ago now, I used to say 2017 is the year we start to see the fractures. That turned out not quite to be the case. The fractures were hidden, but what we did see was the creation of a lot of non-dollar platforms. So the fractures were behind the scenes. At the same time, the development took place of a lot of non-dollar platforms. By that, I mean what you referred to, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That's for development of major projects like railroads, bridges, and port facilities and superhighways and things like that. It also includes the I'm just going to call it the Chinese interbank payment system. It's actually the cross-border, but the CIPS, it's going to be a competitor to SWIFT, and it's already open and being used. It doesn't have a lot of volume yet. But when the U.S. government has sanctions against Iran, for instance, and Russia, well, they're going to use a different bank-to-bank transaction payment system that's not SWIFT. And the Chinese are advocating use of the CIPS. And I think it's going to be a very popular standard to be used within the Eurasian trade zone. Okay, there's another one that's very important and very big, and I think, personally, is the biggest financial development in a generation. It's the combination of the Chinese Shanghai oil for gold futures contract in combination with the soon-to-be inaugurated Chinese RMB oil contract. Many are calling that the petro-yuan contract, and that's correct. It's petroleum, it's oil, and it's the Chinese currency, the yuan. I prefer calling it RMB because it's easier to say, and I don't like the fact that they have a yen, the Koreans have a won, and the Chinese have a yuan. It's very confusing. So Chinese RMB is how to keep it simple. Okay, so you've got the connection now in Shanghai with respect to futures contracts, connecting the RMB currency, the oil price, and the gold price. That is a fracture. That is an arrow in the heart of the petrodollar. That is kicking out two legs of the king dollar's throne. So now take an example. Russia sells oil to China, accepts RMB, takes the RMB, goes straight to Shanghai, converts it to gold, ships it to the Moscow, and stores it in the Kremlin vaults. Wow. That's oil converted to gold by means of Shanghai and the RMB contracts. That's very, very important. Okay, another example. Iran. They sell oil and gas to China. They accept RMB. They convert the RMB to oil, then gold, and they ship the gold and store it in Tehran in their central bank. Okay, what's the main point here? Oil will not be traded in the East in dollar terms, and the producers, if they wish, they will have the option to convert it to gold. That is deadly for the dollar standard that began in 1975 or so with the petroleum backing. I call it the petroleum de facto standard. The de facto standard for the dollar. What is the basis? What has been the basis of the dollar for all these 40 years? It's been oil sales. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you can convert your dollars into oil like a tanker full. It means you keep it in the treasury bond, but to do the purchases, it's done in treasury bills, short-term treasury bills. Okay, that whole standard is fracturing. And that is the big event for this year, 2018. Now, how much volume will that get? And there's some poo-poo analysis, Mike. Let me cover it quickly.
Mm-hmm, go ahead.
The poo-poo analysis out there is, oh, look at that. The RMB for China, it doesn't have much of any more than a couple percent or so in banking reserves across the world. I don't give a shit about banking reserves. I give a shit about trade payments. Watch the trade payment patterns change. Less dollars, more RMB, starting with oil and focus on Saudi Arabia. They're under tremendous pressure right now to accept RMB for oil sales to China. United States is saying to them, basically, you do that, we'll start killing you.
So that's why.
How do you like that?
That's why the monarch of Saudi Arabia, the King King, went to Russia and China to pay them a special visit, huh?
Oh, very much. They're between a rock and a hard place, Mike. And I think that the Saudis have already lost a couple percent of their sales, their market share with China. And here's an example that's not very well publicized in the U.S. press. Qatar already has energy sales. They sell a lot of gas and LNG. Qatar already has significant RMB sales to China. So if you were to say, oh yeah, but the Persian Gulf will never sell China oil in RMB, they already do.
Yeah, no doubt.
And Qatar's not the only one.
Right. So let me ask you a question. So is this also a question from one of the viewers watching us now? It says, what does Jim think about the saber rattling with Iran? Is it serious? And my question is, what's up? Like all of a sudden, I haven't followed it much, but I see it on the mainstream news about Iran. Is this tied into the quest to get into that region and continue to destabilize that area, or do we just always need somebody to pick on? Or what are your thoughts?
Well, we're trying to destabilize Iran, to be sure, but more important is the question, what is Iran doing to exacerbate the frustration of the United States with respect to the dollar? Iran's doing a number of things. First of all, they've got successful workarounds for all the sanctions that started in about 2015. So 3 years of sanctions and not much effect in Iran except, and this is a big except, and it's important, I don't minimize it, except some price inflation. Let me give you a quick example. The U.S. says you can't use SWIFT to send money bank to bank to Iran. So a lot of money gets stuck in Turkey. It's owned by Iranians. A lot of money gets stuck in India. It's owned by Iranians. It gets stuck in other nations. It's owned by Iranians, like in London and Europe. So Iran has a shortage of money because it can't bring home money, and they print it, and the result is price inflation for goods and services. That's the objective for the U.S. policy. Isolate them, cause them pain. The pain's felt in price inflation because they have to print money to make up for all the money they cannot send through the SWIFT transaction system. So, in addition to that, Iran has signed a very big contract with Russian Rosneft to supply them oil and to receive Russian rubles. And you can expect in there to see Chinese RMB because the Russians are loaded with Chinese RMB currency from all the sales they provide. So think of it as an end around for Iran. Iran will do a deal with Russia, sell them oil, put it into what I call the Rosneft consortium for oil, accept RMB as currency, and use that in trade. That's what Iran will do. They'll obtain RMB by way of Russia. Okay, now, the Iranians have been selling oil and gas for quite a while, not in dollars. Now, time to bring up the Iran nuclear deal, because this is one of the biggest black eyes and bruises to American prestige in a generation. We had a multiple nation conference a year ago. They called it the UN Security Council +1. It was the UN Group of 4 plus Germany. Why Germany? Because they're the most powerful economy and financial organization entity in Europe. Okay, so there was a nuclear deal cut. It involved all the major powers of the world. And within 6 months, the United States reneged on it. We made and signed a treaty and then said we're not going to honor it. We're going to continue with our sanctions against Iran. Why? Because they're making even more solid barter bilateral agreements with China. They're cutting more deals with Russia. They're coming up with regional deals to connect Turkey, India, and Iran with port facilities with Chinese money. Look for them to connect to Pakistan, which just recently decided to do 90% of their trade in Chinese RMB, and to tell the U.S., screw. So the United States is between a rock and a hard place with respect to Iran and its European trade partners. There are 5 or 6 European countries that signed the Iran nuclear deal and have been working up their trade linkage with Iran, shipping products, taking payments, and they're frustrated with the United States criminals running our government because we reneged on the treaty that European countries signed. So Iran is going to find that it's going to continue with friendly relations on the European front, and the Americans are going to be screwed. The Americans are going to be told by Europeans, we're sick of your sanctions, we're sick of your broken treaties, we're sick of your filthy wars, we're sick of your trade unions, which are disguised fascism. We don't want any of your shit anymore. And the U.S. is going to get isolated. So Iran is a very good test case for how Europe treats the United States.
All right, so I have a question from a viewer. It says it's in reference to the UK and the yuan oil futures. And the question was, what are your thoughts on the UK pivoting towards a Beijing consensus over maintaining the Washington consensus?
Oh, great question. These are all good questions, Mike. The British, let me be plain. I mean, I can speak loosely, can I not?
Feel free.
Okay. The British are your whores in the room. They've always been your fascist whores in the room. They're nothing but commercial harlots. They'll seek whichever direction the wind is blowing, and they will piss on the United States as much as required in order to get the handshake with China. One of the most incredible developments coming is that I expect the British to abandon the United States economically. Mm-hmm. The British have been, okay, very few people know this, but London is like a sovereign nation. It's called the London Financial Center. They have their own, they have their own president. This is funny. They make their own laws. They have their own courts. Okay, they have their own police. They have their own communication and security systems. Okay, that's the London Financial Center. That is what I call a fascist headquarters with bankers running it. Okay, they do not want to lose business when the Eurasian trade zone takes greater form, coalesces, builds its volume, creates its ties, and grows. So what they're trying to do now is suck up to China, and they really pissed off the Obama administration because Britain signed on as a member nation to the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The Obama administration actually threatened them, and the British said, F you. The British want to create what's called an RMB trading hub in London. Here's its 2 main features. 1, currency exchange. Give you an example. The French or the Belgians or the Portuguese have a bunch of RMB that they received by selling stuff to China. Whatever. I don't care what they sold. Could be orange crates, could be anything, could be, wood, cement, I don't care, lumber. They sold in trade to China and received RMB. So the Portuguese or the Belgians can go straight to London, convert the RMB to euros, and go on their merry way with their economy. And the London boys get a cut. They get their VIG, they get their fee. That's standard operating procedure. Okay, so London does not want Frankfurt, Germany to win this RMB trading hub business. They don't want the Portuguese and French and Belgians to take their RMB and go to Germany and convert it to euros. And the Germans win the VIG, the fee, the transfer commissions. So that's the currency side. The other side of the RMB trading hub is bond issuance. And my best example, and I think this is coming like night follows day. The Italians are very soon going to issue what's called a panda bond. Panda bond is a bond issued by a country outside China, but denominated in RMB. So the Italians can say, we're going to issue 20 billion euros worth of bonds, but denominated in RMB, and we're going to try to attract Chinese investors to finance the Italian deficits. Why would the Chinese want to invest in that? Because there's no currency risk. They wouldn't care what happens to the euro RMB cross. Okay, so the Londoners want the panda bond issuance business because if they broker it, they get a fee. And it's usually more, much more than currency transfer. Currency transfer is like a 1%. Bond issuance is like 5, 6, 7%. The panda bond business is going to grow. I think it's going to start with Italy and Spain and Portugal, maybe Greece, but Greece is a captured, destroyed country.
Speaking of which, the euro area with all the non-performing loans and just the banking problems they are having over there, how much longer before we see something as far as, a central bank or a government doing all the process of trying to remove themselves from the euro? Is that something in the cards in the next year or give or take as far as any country that will leave the euro first or the next exit, rather?
Let me give a preliminary answer to set the stage here because this is a complex question. Mm-hmm. And I'm an honest analyst, Mike. I don't have everything figured out. Mm-hmm. I don't, how should I say? I don't avoid mistakes from time to time. I don't think I make very many, though. Here's something that came to my attention about a year ago. The euro currency is unique. It has various participants. It actually has a weighting structure with a GH in there. It has weights that add up to 100%. And each country, the member nations for the European Monetary Union, which is the euro currency structure, they each have a weight. The biggest is Germany. I think the next biggest is France. So when you take a currency and you convert it to euro, whether it's a sale or a buy, they have their reaction on the other side within the euro, and they use the weights to clear it and make it final. Okay, which means if one country exits, like Italy, I love Italy as an example because I think Italy is Italy's going to be the country that breaks it, Italy or France. Suppose Italy comes in and says, we're out. We're out of the euro. We're done with it. It's been nothing but a noose around our necks, and we don't want the German bankers to wreck our country like they did Greece. Okay, mm-hmm. That's open debate right now. If the Italians break out of the euro, the entire euro must be renegotiated because they would lose, for instance, 7% weight. What happens to the rest? And it's not as simple as saying the 7% would be divided among the remainders in the EMU. Doesn't work that way. It'd have to be renegotiated and restructured all over again, and they're not ready to do that. So if any country breaks out of the euro, it's going to end the euro. Okay, yeah. With that in mind, what countries are the most likely and when to break out of the euro? Done with my introduction. That sets the table and introduces more complexity than some of the listeners had been aware of before. Not so simple to break out.
Now,
the rest don't just continue.
Now, Jim, 1 second. Can you hold that thought? We have a caller. Caller, what's your name and where you calling from?
Hi, Mike. This is Tony.
Tony again. How you doing? What's your question for Jim again?
On the MiFID II, I just seen it roll out in January. Could you explain how that's going to affect the U.S. and their derivatives?
The what in January?
The MiFID II.
The MiFID II.
I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about. The what?
MiFID II.
The global financial.
Rolled out in January.
So that's the global financial market.
The EU.
So that's the
MiSID II. I have no idea. What is it?
It's where the EU and the U.S. have agreed on their derivatives separation rather than on their trade deficits.
Oh, so it's a derivative accord between the United States and the EU.
Correct.
Uh-huh. Well, can I finish my answer on Italy and France first?
Sure. No worries.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Because there's a very important point regarding Italy and France.
All right, go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
That's okay. We got it. We got it on the table now. Italy and France are different. They've done different things compared to other European countries. Italy just created what they call the sovereign type of currency. And it's only usable between banks, financial entities, and covering the Italian government deficit. It's not good for currency to buy a car or a house or groceries. Okay. This sovereign type currency is now in usage in Italy and might eventually convert to the old type of Italian lira currency. So the Italians have set up something that could eventually morph into a return to an independent national currency like the lira. That is very interesting because it has the capability of being devalued at the same time. Okay, now let's turn to France. France has done something extremely interesting and unique. They've done an accounting to determine what proportion of their French government debt is pre-euro. And the answer is 65%. So since the euro came in, their new debt now comprises about 35% of total French government debt. They have reserved the right for the pre-euro debt to return to the French franc. This is unbelievable. It's like they're actually saying, we might come up with a new currency that's 35% euro, 65% French franc. Wow. Talk about introducing a new level of confusion in the European currency system.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm watching Italy. I'm watching France. I think the desperation is going to come from Italy, though, because their banks are fracturing, and they've got bank runs, and they've got these cocoa bonds that are getting ruined, and they've got a lot of deception with bond investors for banks who are losing everything. They're having suicides. They're having a lot of controversy, and it's entered into their parliamentary debate. Okay, that's the end of my answer regarding the EU. As for the MiSID, is that it? MiSID?
I think it's MiFID II.
Oh, MiFID. Okay, sorry. Yes, financial.
Global financial market for more open and transparency activity between derivatives or something like that.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me be plain. That's a bunch of bullshit. What they're trying to do is drag Europe down when the United States gets killed by a nuclear event regarding derivatives. Okay?
Yeah.
That's not a simple statement to swallow. It's not to reform the derivatives. It's not to make them more transparent. I don't give a crap what they say. I care about reality.
Let me give you a definition of what I just found on the internet. It says that MIFID 2 will apply from January 3rd of 2018. It says this new legislative framework will strengthen investor protection and improve the functioning of financial markets, making them more efficient, resilient, and transparent. So that's what
bullshit. What they're trying to do is streamline and share the responsibility of fabricated treasury bond demand. Because right now, if you look at look at just say a block of $100 billion worth of treasury bonds going to auction, you'll find that about 90% of it is bought by Wall Street and the U.S. government itself through its Department of Treasury Exchange Stabilization Fund. I said front. That's fine. That's a Freudian slip. The Exchange Stabilization Fund with its front of phony banks. What I'm trying to say is 90% of the debt financed by the U.S. government for its deficit is done in a phony internal way. We want some help. So we're going to drag in Europe and probably have Deutsche Bank a main cog to that, because Deutsche Bank is the derivative outpost run by Wall Street.
Yeah. Now, Jim, as we draw towards the end of our conversation, because I want to respect your time, and so I got a couple questions. So if you want to just touch on them, or you can elaborate on them, or whatever you choose to do. But one question from a viewer now is in regards to the whole petro yuan, and it says the petro yuan contract started trading on the 18th of this month. He said, "I wonder if China will reprice gold in the Shanghai exchange to reflect the price needed to back their contracts with gold."
Oh boy, really tough question. And I'm wondering the same thing. And not only that, but I'm wondering regarding the Chinese gold contract, I'm wondering where the supply is going to come from. Because if they don't get some kind of an integration across different regions of the world, there might be a run on the gold supply in China, and they're not going to tolerate that. Is something like what this questioner is hinting at. There might be a move that begins when this petro yuan, I just hate the word yuan. It sounds like yen, it sounds like Korean won.
Petro renminbi.
Yeah, the RMB. When the RMB contract for oil comes into being for Shanghai, we might start seeing some pressure on the gold market. There might be more talk of a quantum jump in the gold price. There might be talk that China is looking to destroy the COMEX. There might be talk that Russia and China are going to make a very strong initiative for their BRICS gold trading platform to wrestle away control of the gold price. Now, I'm on record for the last few years as saying when China's had enough of the Western bullshit, they're going to start doing things that make it so that the gold price goes dark. And by that I mean London and New York will not report a gold price. By that I mean London and New York will have a great shortage in their volume of gold futures contracts. The Chinese might have some kind of a deal where they put a gun to Washington and New York and London's head, and they say, we want you to gradually taper down the volume of your paper gold trades, the futures contracts, COMEX and LBMA, London Bullion Market Association. I think China's going to start throwing their weight around a little bit more and force the gold price to be in the next stage, force it into the next stage, which would be characterized by more confusion and more darkness. I'm on record as saying that I expect an intermediary phase. This might be 7 different prices in 7 parts of the globe, and they're not all equal. And in order to post a price, they have to actually sell gold, which would mean that New York and London have no price.
Right.
That would be a very interesting development. I'm talking about Delhi having a price, Ankara, Turkey having a price, Tehran, Iran, a price, Shanghai, a price, Moscow, a price, Frankfurt, Germany, a price, maybe Helsinki, a price. Finland is very unique. They are not in the U.S. fold.
Now, in order to have a price or to be able to get in that conversation of listing a price, you got to actually have some physical gold to back up that price you claiming, right?
You got to have some delivery of that at that price, right? Which means that London and New York are excluded. Rome might have a price. Dubai might have a price. Johannesburg might have a price. For all I know, Panama City will have a price. Maybe Rio de Janeiro will have a price because they would actually sell it and deliver the metal. So the Chinese, I think, are going to start throwing their weight around to try to make the gold market more legitimate. And that means they're going to have to do things to gradually shut down the COMEX. So when the Petro One comes in, boy, that RMB oil contract, I don't think it'll be January 18th. I think they keep, remember they had a December 15th date? Okay, that came and went. I think this will come and go too. And then we'll be left with a February date. What they're doing is they're testing the U.S. reaction. How does Wall Street react and their slave government in Washington, their controlled government in Washington, how does it react to the imminent launch of the RMB oil contract in Shanghai? Well, we're seeing it in Iran. And by the way, some of the demonstrations you see on the television in the United States, it's just an insult to your intelligence. Some of the demonstrations are actually from 2 years ago in Bahrain. It's so funny. It's so easy to fool the American public.
All right.
They're not very bright.
And we tend to believe everything we see on the mainstream news, which has been a problem. That's why the fake news initiative is a lot stronger than the mainstream narrative these days. So, yeah. So, no, I said as we wound down, last question, and so Tony, the gentleman that called in, asked where do you cash in your yuan for gold at? In all this convertibility, where do you foresee being able to go to the gold exchange or Shanghai Gold Exchange directly and cashing gold, or will that be the linkage to the commercial banks if you want to cash your gold in for yuan?
What if you want to buy gold? Isn't that the real question?
Yeah.
Let me be very honest. I don't know the answer to your question. I think that Shanghai has a challenge right now. If they sell gold from deliverable contracts, they're going to have to create some outposts. And I think they're going to do so in the BRICS countries. By that, I mean, there would be a Johannesburg, South Africa outpost that honors the Shanghai contract and delivers the gold. There will be a, let's say, Mumbai or Delhi, India outpost for the Shanghai yuan gold contract, and they will honor it and deliver the gold. There will be a Moscow outpost that honors the Shanghai gold contract. What I'm driving at is the BRICS might be where the purchases can go. And I don't think at this point there are going to be a whole lot of people dumping their gold, because we've had several years where the dumbest people in the room are selling their gold. And they're running out of dumb people to sell.
Right. And that's all the dumb people you're referring to are the Western nations, I take it, huh? Like Canada, how they sold all their gold, and how we haven't really commented on our gold other than just, I guess, the Treasury Secretary saying that the gold is there, or some statement he made.
Oh, wasn't that interesting, Mike? I tell you, I laughed. I laughed a howl when I heard that. And my initial reaction with my colleagues here, I got 9 different Jackass colleagues, and we're like our own little inner circle. We trade ideas and get our analysis roaming and get a discussion going and get a dispute and debate, whatever. But when that came out, I made a comment, well, golly, Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, what is his background but movie production? So he had a little movie production where he staged it in front of Fort Knox in Kentucky. Now, I asked some other questions. He said the gold is all there, it's all good. Did he even go inside?
Right, he probably just drove by.
Okay, well let me fill in a couple of facts. Okay, first of all is the vehicle, the trucks, the armored trucks. Okay, when Robert Rubin was Treasury Secretary during the Clinton administration, it wasn't for all 8 years. It was mainly the final 4 years of that administration, and he resigned 6 months early so that he could short the stock market, and he made a lot of money with that too. He's one of the biggest criminals ever to sit in the position of Treasury Secretary. Just a quick example: he organized a conference for settling with American Native Indians. They got a $5 billion settlement, and then Citigroup under Robert Rubin stole it all. Okay, that's the kind of criminal Robert Rubin is. But he set up the gold carry trade, 0%. Here are the 2 main points. Kentucky residents noticed that on a weekly basis, a group of armored trucks arrived at Fort Knox, what they called riding high, which means the base of the truck was way off the ground. And when they exited Fort Knox, they were riding low, which meant they were weighed down by tonnage of gold bars. So every week for a few years during the Rubin administration, trucks arrived riding high and left riding low. They did not have to see the gold. They knew there was weight in there. They weren't hauling lumber. Second point, I've got a Jackass colleague. I call him George of the Comex. It's not his real name. Got to call him something. Because when clients say, hey, can you ask a question to George of the Comex? I pass it on to George of the Comex. But he doesn't want his identity given away. Because, he doesn't want to get shot. I mean, this is really high stakes games. Well, about 5 years ago, I had a relationship with George the Jungle, George of the Comex, for at least 8-9 years. And I remember exactly how he got introduced into the group, and that's the story in itself. And it's all very interesting how this evolved, but I got 9 guys, and the voice is one of them. He's got the strongest voice. George of the Jungle said, it's the Comex Jungle. He said, I've got a friend who was a trading buddy of mine when I was at the Comex. We did interest rate contract, we did metal contract, we did a lot of different contracts. Didn't do them all, but I had a friend, and he finally quit. And he quit around the year 2000. And he said, Jim, it's very interesting because I've maintained contact with him. He was a friend of mine. We used to work together. And now he's a rich source of information because he's in charge of the Fort Knox security contract.
Really? Okay.
And what do you think is in Fort Knox that they're guarding?
Empty pallets.
Oh, no. It's got something in there. Empty pallets is fine. I mean, it's an intelligent thing to say. You got empty pallets in there. What does it have, though? It's a warehouse. What does it have? What are they guarding? If there's nothing in there, why do they have a security force?
Oh.
Nerve gas. We replaced and stole the gold bars and made it a nerve gas warehouse.
Wow, that's first time I ever heard that one. That's
Well, maybe that's why Mnuchin didn't want to go in.
well, yeah.
He didn't want to put on a suit, hazmat suit,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't want to be photographed coming out with a hazmat suit. With all the questions of why do you have a hazmat suit? Is the gold radioactive, Mr. Mnuchin? Oh my gosh. We are so corrupt in everything financial in the United States. It is so bad that our charitable organizations are 95% overhead. Why on earth do we need a cancer research fund when Big Pharma makes billions?
Yeah. Well, Jim Willie, editor of the Hat Trick Letter, found at goldenjackass.com. I appreciate you taking time to join us here on Rethinking the Dollar. And so I actually have your site up right now. And so people can see exactly what goldenjackass.com is for those that are new. And then also those that are, viewers of RTD. I recently had a little issue with my website, but it's back up. So if you guys want to go over there, check out some of the shirts and things I have, feel free to be a blessing to the show. I appreciate that. Other than that, Jim, anything that you want to leave us with before we take off?
I think people better be very careful with their paper assets. I'm talking about bank CDs, talking about stock portfolios, talking about bond portfolios. I don't think they're safe. There used to be years ago a saying that you sell high and you buy low. Now's the time to sell your paper assets when they're high because they're supported by the central banks. There's nowhere in the central bank charter for the Federal Reserve, nowhere, where they have the license or permission to buy stocks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's holding up the stock market. It's the free money diverted to stock markets. Okay, it's time to buy low, buy the gold and silver, in particular silver. I just cannot emphasize that enough. I've got a good friend of the family who has a couple $100,000 sitting in 3 big bank accounts. They're all Wall Street banks. He does not know the risk. They're not safe. When we have a conversion to the new Scheist dollar, that money will not be safe. It'll be forced into conversion and probably suffer a bail-in. Okay, let me just quickly give you a description of what's on the Golden Jackass website.
Please do.
www.goldenjackass.com. There are 2 monthly reports. One is called the Global Money War Report. The other one is called the Gold and Currency Report. They do have overlapping topics, but the Money War Report is basically about central bank policy, defense of the dollar, banking systems. And the Gold and Currency Report is about supply and demand of gold. It also is about the petrodollar oil policy and the Eurasian trade zone coming into form, with a lot on China. There used to be more on China and Russia. Now I have more about the Eurasian trade zone and how it's coming together and various non-dollar platforms that are, taking shape and getting momentum and, just showing their strength, showing their power and the potential. Okay, so I invite people to go to goldenjackass.com and sign up for the newsletter. And I love mentioning my 2 favorite compliments. Jim, I left your newsletter for a few years. I've come back. I should never have left. Another one is I've been listening to your free podcast for a while and never thought of signing up, but I finally did, and I wish I had long ago. So those are the 2, type A, type B compliments. And I hope people go to the website and sign up. It's the free page, main 5. It's just the 5th version of the free main page. It has a lot of interviews like this, and it has public articles with links. So thanks for having me on, Mike, and we'll have to do this again. I love the question and answer format. It's because it gets to what people are thinking about, what's on their plate.
Right. So the whole idea of the show was to, give the people a voice. And so we had a good amount of participation today, which is good. So once again, Jim, Willie, thank you for joining us. Have a great new year, and definitely look forward to having you back on down the line and getting your thoughts and commentary on what's happening at that point in time. So other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. And you guys, thank you for tuning in and asking questions. Definitely follow Jim, or if you don't know Jim, get a chance to know him by following him at his site, as well as other things he does and commentary he has around the internet. So look forward to bringing you guys more RTD Live talks in the future. Logging off now.